Welcome back, Two Hats family, to the Two Hats podcast. I'm your host, Chris, the tactical probation officer, and this is my wonderful co-host.
Is Brittany your favorite PO?
All right, we have a great episode for you guys today. We interviewed Shane. He is a retired Alaska probation and parole officer. So, as you guys know, we try to bring you guys interviews with officers from all over the country, so that you guys can hear how things are done in different parts of the states. And stay tuned. Enjoy episode number 17. I have so many questions. And so we'll just go ahead and get started. Now, thinking back to your time as a probation officer in Alaska, we have a couple standard questions that we ask everyone. So the first question is the department itself. On the two hat scale, 1 to 10, with 1 being a social worker and 10 being a law enforcement officer or cop, deputy sheriff, how would you rate your department on the two hat scale?
With Alaska probation parole was quite different than most departments that I've spoken to. In Alaska, you're a regular sworn post-certified law enforcement officer, so you go through the academy, you do everything. So I would say, because of the mix that you do in the nature of the job, it's probably between an 8 and a 9, because you do a lot of law enforcement, you do a lot of patrolling, you do warrant arrests, you do all kinds of stuff. You wear, as you say, 2 hats.
Wow, you said patrolling. Wow, we definitely have to get into that, because I got some good questions for that. So you said the department's about an 8 or a 9. So you personally on the scale, are you 8 or 9, or do you move around yourself on the scale?
As far as in my career,
well, when you were a PO in Alaska, how did you rate yourself on the scale?
I think I was more of a mix. I don't think I was leaning one way or another. I think I was pretty close to probably a 6 or a 7, just because of the nature of the job. And my position was a specialized position to begin with, so I think I did a lot more of the community involvement and getting out there and dealing with victims and that than a lot of the other units did.
So what made you want to get into this profession to begin with?
Oh man, you're gonna make me tell my secrets. My dad's best friend when I was a kid was a game warden. His name was Russ Marshington. He was the longest lived game warden in the state of Montana. He put 42 years in before he retired. He talked me into it, and of course, then I was in Bozeman. I applied to go to the law enforcement academy, and I was, quite honestly, I was kind of a hellraiser as a kid. So everybody was surprised that I was on the other side of the glass, So I asked the local deputy of the little town that I went to high school in. There's 2 deputies there. That's how little it is. I asked him for a recommendation, and he laughed at me, and he said, I'll give you one, just because I don't think you'll make it. And I went in, I tested, did my PT, I did pre-service academy, and then I started applying for game warden jobs, and I got it while I was in college. I was studying fish and wildlife management and criminal justice, and so I was a game warden from 1990 through 1998.
That's a long time. You must have really liked it.
That was a miserable job. I knew once once I got into law enforcement, I knew that I wanted to do some aspect of law enforcement. I moved from there to Cascade County in Great Falls, Montana, and I started out as a corrections officer there, and then moved on to being a deputy. And when I moved to Alaska, I knew that being on patrol and being a deputy was completely different, but it's always reactive. It's not proactive. So I wanted to do something more proactive. And I know the nature of the position when you have, offenders coming into you and you're supervising them, it's semi-reactive because you're reacting to what they did. That's how they came to be with you in the first place. But I wanted to do something more involved with their lives. And I always had that, that one thing, that one person I wanted to change and, to get through. And I thought that would be the one thing that was the cherry on my Sunday for my career, is just to get through to that one person and change their life. And I felt that doing probation and parole, I could do that better than being a regular law enforcement, police officer on the street.
Oh, definitely, for sure. I agree. What about you, Chris?
I mean, that's definitely, I think, why anyone really gets into probation, is that you want to be that positive change. You want to be that, that person to help somebody get back on their feet, become a productive member of society. So, Shane, before we get too much more into, what it is being a probation officer in the state of Alaska, tell us a little bit about you, just as a person.
No, I'm an open book. I don't care. It's like I see a lot of guys that were, and gals that were probation parole officers that were super secretive. They didn't want anybody to know anything about them. I'm like, the people that I worked with were well, I'll just put it plainly. I worked on a specialized unit. I worked with extremely high risk violent sex offenders. Those are the people I supervised. So a lot of the people didn't want anybody to know their name, didn't want them. I mean, I definitely didn't want them to know where I lived, but I didn't care if they knew that I was married at the time, that I had kids, and that, what I did before. I mean, I was proud of that. I gave them something to look up to. So for me personally, I'm a biker. I've got tattoos up and down my arms and my legs and my back, and I ride. I have 1, 2, 3 Harleys and 2 Victories. So yeah, I ride.
Wait a minute. You had all those tattoos while you were working as PO?
Yeah. My ears are gauged too. I've had gauges for, I don't know, probably 15 years now.
Now that's interesting. A lot of departments don't even allow the POs to wear that type of ear. What do they call it? Gauges?
Gauge. Yeah.
Yeah. Or have visible tattoos. Or did you have to cover them up at work?
No. When I first started as a deputy in Montana, I did, because the department would not, the office would not allow me to have tattoos that were visible. So I had to wear long sleeve shirts. And in Montana in the summertime, it gets to 100, 105 degrees. It's hot. And so I had to wear a long sleeve shirt all the time until the new sheriff got elected. And he's like, "Hey, Sarge, why are you wearing a long sleeve shirt?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm covering up my tattoos." And he goes, looks at me, looks down at his arm, and he is a retired Marine gunny sergeant. And he goes, "I got tattoos. Go into the supply and get you a short sleeve shirt. You look like you're about to die." So Alaska didn't care. I mean, there's a lot of Alaska state troopers that have throat tattoos and tattoos all the way down to their fingertips. I mean, they don't care. It's not something that they're bothered by. Our department, with the Department of Corrections up there, they didn't care. They're like, just as long as you're not, out doing stupid crap, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I just got a feeling that Alaska's a different kind of place.
What's that?
I just got a feeling that Alaska's just a different kind of place.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for certain. It's so big and so vast. I mean, if you look at Alaska, you're looking at the population of about 600,000 people in a state that covers 1/4 of the lower 48 states. And fully 1/2 of those people live in one city, and that's Anchorage. So the major population is right there. And Anchorage is, if you count all of Anchorage, because they're not counties, they're boroughs. So the Anchorage borough is just, the city itself is 26 miles long, because it's right up along the coast on the Cook Inlet there. And so it's really narrow, but it's really, really long. And then you have J Bear, which is one of the biggest it's one of the biggest military bases in the United States. It's a joint base, Elmendorf and Richardson. It's a Army and Air Force base combined, and that thing's huge. It's like a city inside of a city. But it's beautiful. I hated it, but it's beautiful. it it's cold and dark in the wintertime, and it's muggy and rainy, and the sun doesn't go down in the summertime. It's just you can't sleep, and then you're tired all the time. And yeah,
Like in my mind, I just feel like Alaska, Alaska is like it's just straight like frontiers. There's no laws. It's just lawless. It's like the Wild West. I mean, I
right.
could be totally wrong. I'm pretty sure I am, but in my mind, that's how I view it. And I mean, like, how is it in terms of law and order and structure and like supervising people that are so spread out?
But it's a lot of people think that same thing, that and it used to be. There's no doubt about it. It used to be like the Wild West. It was, if you got into trouble in the lower 48 and you had to get away, you went to Alaska because nobody was coming to get you. I mean, even when I was a police officer here in the state of Montana, unless you had a $50,000 or more warrant and you were in Alaska, you were just staying there. They just, if you got arrested in Alaska, they'd call you up and say, you want to confirm the warrant? They're like, yeah, we're not coming to get him. You might as well let him go because it's not worth it.
Mm.
Now it's quite different. It's like every place else. I mean, the only thing that they did a lot, I guess, is what I've been gone for 3 years. So it was about 5 years ago they did the justice reform bill. A lot of states are doing that, and they tweaked everything. They took everything but class A felonies. They moved from, so like they started a class B felony, and you have class B's turned into class C turned into a D, and a D turned into a class A misdemeanor. And then all those things trickled down, and it turned into a non-arrestable offense. So that affected us too, because a lot of the things that we would normally be able to arrest the probationer for before and give them a little bit of their suspended time or something, we weren't allowed to arrest them for it because it was a non-arrestable offense. And it affected probation and parole that way. So it kind of went to kind of a lawless land, as you'd put it. And then about 2 years ago, a year or two ago, they repealed that and they went back the other way. They lowered the felony dollar amount. They put everything back. They made things more for arrestable offenses. Gave probation and parole officers their teeth back and said, okay, this is what we're going to do, because it was just getting way out of hand. So they redid it. Montana's justice reform bill was modeled after Alaska's, and we're seeing the same things now that were happening in Alaska. So I imagine with the new governor and the more conservative leaning government in Montana, it'll probably go back the other way again, and probably very soon, because it does get out of hand. And I think they had good intentions, but it just didn't work.
I mean, that sounds like something we were talking about in our last episode with the chief of the Idaho probation and parole, where we're talking about the pendulum swing, how they'll go through periods where, okay, let's try to help everybody, let's try to kind of soften up a little bit, and then things get out of hand, and then it's, well, now we have to go back to dropping the hammer on everybody. So I mean, it happens, unfortunately. On the good times they try to give people chances, and then when things get out of hand, they go back the other way. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle.
It's the nature of the business. To help them, you have to be able to they have to have the consequence, but they have
to have accountability.
Yeah, they have to have that consequence and that accountability, but they have to have that person that's going to give them a chance and say, okay, you screwed up. Here's your consequence. When you're done, let's try it again. And you just keep pushing them forward and saying, if you keep making the same mistakes over and over and over, then you gotta really figure out what you're doing wrong. It's not the system, it's you. If you can get that through their head, then they're all right. But yeah, I think a lot of, like, I have some friends that are probation and parole officers in Montana, and they're saying the same things are happening here as it did there. It's like the offenders they didn't care. There was no consequence for them for the actions that they were doing. They're like, oh, I may have 3 years suspended time hanging over my head, but guess what? They're not going to be able to throw me in jail, so I'm just going to go do it anyway. And then, they don't have those consequences. You got to have a graduated thing, I think. And personally, I use the graduated portion of it. You'd get at the risk of sounding like an old dad, you'd get a stern warning. You're like, you keep messing up, then we're going to have an issue. And then I might have them come into the office, twice a week and come and see me. And if they did it again, it was like, you're going to check in every morning before you go to work. I want to see it. I might put them on and, more frequent UAs. I would go see them at their job, which really embarrassed them because, the nature of my position with probation and parole, I was plain clothes. So I would put my vest on under everything and I would conceal my weapon and then go in. But if it was to the point where I had to go see you at work, I was going in full uniform. And it just embarrassed the crap out of them. They're like, all right. I get it. Don't come to my job. You're embarrassing me. You're scaring everybody. And it's like, well, you know what? Quit messing up. I'd go see him. The chief didn't like the fact that I would go see my probationers at midnight. But I'm like, when's the time that they're getting in trouble? It's not during the day. They're at work. They're getting in trouble at night because they're out doing drugs or they're out drinking or they're out past their curfew or whatever. And I said, so if I go check on them in the middle of the night when they're not least expecting it, I was kind of one of those guys.
Most likely to catch them.
Yeah, that's when you catch them. Like they're doing the dumb things then, so it was easier for me to catch them and make sure they were doing the right thing. But I think still the recidivism rate was still really high. So I think that seems to be pretty standard across the states, with that recidivism. But
yeah, 30%, I believe, is the percent. Well, 30%, I think, is the national recidivism rate, which is still pretty kind of high if you think about it.
It was between 30 and 33 the last time I looked. That's pretty high still. But Alaska,
one in three.
Yeah, Alaska's recidivism rate's actually a lot higher. I don't know why. It's extremely high.
Do you think it's the mindset of the people? Just they're more independent leaning. They're more. I don't know.
No.
Kind of goes back to that wild, Wild West type mentality.
I think part of it's because of the size of the state and how isolated things are. So some of the probationers, they live in a village where it's a 3 or 4 hour plane ride to get to their actual residence. And they would start out, like they'd have to transfer into Anchorage. They'd start out with us. And then if they were doing well and they had a long period of time where they were following the rules, doing treatment, doing everything that they needed to, we'd allow them to go back to the village, back home, be with their family members and stuff. And that's when you'd see them get in trouble. So I think that was like, for that state, I think is the big determining factor for recidivism. That and alcohol there is just rampant.
So if they get arrested in the northern part of the state, right? I guess they go to, is all court in Anchorage, or are there different courts in the state?
Yeah, there's different courts in the state. It's like everywhere else. You have different districts. So you have District 1 through 9 in Alaska, and district court will be in the closest village or the closest town that actually has the ability to have a courtroom. And some of those, there's only 9 of them in the entire state, so some of them are quite a ways away from the villages. There's a big area that judge or those judges actually have jurisdiction over. So they would go to the closest one. A lot of times the troopers would call me and say, hey, Coop, what do you want to do with this person? And I'm like, do you have the ability to hold them? And they're like, yeah, we can throw them in here and we'll put them on the next plane out. And they get them they escort them on the next plane out and meet them at the airport and put them in the patrol car and take them to the office. Do the paperwork.
Wow.
in Anchorage, and then they answer for what they're doing in a different district in Anchorage because that's where they're supervised from.
So everyone in the state is supervised from Anchorage.
No. You have like if you go north into like Bethel, Bethel has its own probation and parole office. They have Anchorage has Alaska has 4 probation and parole districts. Anchorage is its own district. Anchorage is District 3. The rest of them are bigger swaths of area, but they have less people. Active when I left, the active probationers, probation and parole count in Anchorage Bowl itself was like 4,700 people. That you got to understand that the office in Anchorage has 78 probation and parole officers in it, just to handle the caseload. Some of the general caseload guys, their caseloads were insanely big. I mean, you're looking at 120 to 150 people a person that they're supervising. Whereas on the sex offender unit that I worked on, we were capped at 75. So we weren't allowed to have more than 75 people on our caseloads. And there was 10 of us on the unit.
750 sex offenders in Anchorage.
No, that's your general offenders. So, anywhere from the drunks to the murderers were on what they call a general caseload. Anything that's specialized is you have specialized caseloads. So you have the mental health caseload, and then you have probation, the sex offender caseload, and the sex offender and the mental health caseloads. Mental health caseloads were capped at 25 per PO, and the sex offenders were capped at 75 per PO. So,
and you said there were 10. You said there were 10 sex offender POs.
Yeah.
So that means so if they each have 75, then there's 750 sex offenders in Anchorage.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of them
that are on probation.
That are on probation.
Yeah.
Or parole.
Those people, they're not all just from Anchorage though, and that's the weird thing is because the only other place that has sex offender therapy, so they have the therapists and the treatment to go to is Juneau. So they can either go to Juneau or they can go to Anchorage because Anchorage has 5 therapists that work exclusively with sex offenders. So they have to do their treatment, their sex offender treatment. And that's required for every sex offender. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what offense it was. You have to go through treatment. And a lot of them actually have to do it in prison. They'll have to go to treatment in prison. They graduate from prison and then they continue when they get out on probation and parole. And then they'll graduate from their program and they'll be on most of them, it takes 3 to 4 years for them to graduate. Some of them will never get away from it, but then they'll do like maintenance things. So if I had several that were not the extreme violent ones that were, pretty easy to deal with, but they would graduate the program within 2 or 3 years, do everything that they had to, show up to their meetings 3 times a week. And then after that, it was like they check in with the treatment group once a month. And they'd go in, they'd have a meeting with the treatment group once a month, and then they'd come back and report to me, and that treatment provider would report to me. So it's a different world when you're dealing with sex offenders than it is for general caseload.
All right, so let me understand. So regardless of where they live in the state, which is it's a big state, like you said, it's about a quarter of the continental United States. So let's say they live on the east side of the state, and there's only 2 places in the whole state that offer sex offender treatment. They have to do it. So they're required to live in Anchorage until they complete the treatment.
Yes.
And then after they complete the treatment and they're in good standing, then you will allow them to go back to wherever part of the state they live.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll
But then if they get in trouble again, then they get arrested and you got to put them on a plane to bring them back to Anchorage.
Yeah, it's that or they transfer Sometimes they'll just transfer their probation. They'll transfer their supervision. I don't know if you guys do that, where they can transfer
Yeah.
from one next or one office to the next. Sometimes they'll just transfer their supervision. So if I had somebody out in Dillingham, say, and Dillingham is on the west coast of Alaska, out across the inlet, and it's really isolated. If they were from Dillingham, there was actually a probation parole officer in Dillingham. If he had enough availability on his caseload, I call him up, and his name was Rex Spofford, and I'd say, "Hey Rex, can you take so and so?" And he's like, "Yeah, put in the paperwork." Or he'd say, "No, I'm full. We just can't deal with it right now." And so they'd have to stay. But if they could transfer, they would, and then they'd be supervised by a different PO. But they had to go somewhere where there was a specialized probation parole officer. Otherwise, they weren't allowed to go. So if the
Wow.
secretary wanted to go back out to Antioch, well, there's no probation parole officer in Antioch, and there's no sex offender probation parole officer in Antioch. Then that was almost an automatic no. It's not happening. You're not going back. You have to get everything done, finish your probation parole here, and they would just move, and then they'd start over. And it was tough on them. It was really hard. And a lot of them were just like, "I just want to go home." Like, you can't. I'm sorry.
Wow, that's crazy. Brittany, can you imagine that? Telling offenders now you have to move to a whole other part of the state because we ain't got no POs out there for you.
No, that's crazy. People who live 30 minutes away had a problem with coming to probation, so I can't even imagine having to deal with that.
You have to uproot your whole life.
To get to see me once a month, they'd have to drive an hour and a half just to get to see me. And if I needed to go do a home visit with them or something, I'd have to drive an hour and a half to get there. So it's difficult. It was a different animal up there than it is in other states. I think that's what really surprises people is how the vastness and what you have to do to actually be on probation and parole. And in Alaska is one of those weird places where you don't have. I mean, Alaska is if you finish 2/3 of your sentence, your probation or your prison sentence, they automatically kick you out of jail, and you automatically go on probation or parole. They don't give you a choice. They don't say you're serving all your time. If you do 2/3 of your time, you're out, and you get assigned a PO in an office, and they say this is the closest place to you that fits your needs. There you go.
So it's kind of
Do
like
you have
it's like
some
kind of
offense?
like
Oh, go ahead.
mandatory post. It's like mandatory post release. Then, like you're gonna take this.
Yeah.
You have no choice. You can't max out.
Nope, they can't max out. That you have no choice. You get out on supervision.
Yeah, that's how it is where I'm at. Go ahead.
Do you
Brittany.
have some offenders who would just quit and stop reporting and all that stuff just so they wouldn't have to deal with it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think everybody has those where they're just like,
I feel like you would have a whole lot more though.
some of them wouldn't even show up. They'd be
Yeah.
like, the day that they're supposed to be in my office, their first day of probation, they wouldn't even show up. So I'd try to
That
get a hold
happens everywhere.
everything would be completely, non-existent. So I'd have to issue a warrant. And then I had a couple of them that were 3 and 4 years before they actually got picked up. I'm like, dude, if you can do that well and not break the law for 3 or 4 years, why didn't you just come and see me? And we could
They
have,
didn't get
a lot
caught
easier.
for 3 or 4 years. Good, correct. They didn't get caught for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
That's all that means.
good correction. Yes, thank you for that. But yeah, they didn't get caught for 3 or 4 years, and if you didn't get caught for 3 or 4 years, it would have been pretty easy just to not do stupid crap for 3 or 4 years and come and see me once a month. It wasn't that hard.
Yeah, but for those 3 or 4 years, they didn't have to come see you. They didn't have to worry about you come to their job. They didn't have to submit to drug screens. They didn't have to go to treatment. They got to just keep doing,
They
keep
didn't
doing
have
what they
to
want to
fly
do as long as they stay
4
under the
hours
radar. You're right.
I would do video calls with the guys on the fishing boats. So during the fishing season, the crabbing season and stuff, the guys wanted. I mean, that's a big business. Alaska is fishing and crabbing. So they'd get a job and they'd get hired onto a boat. Well, you'd have to do a video call with them, and they'd have to check in. So most of the boats had the ability to have they had a fax machine. So they'd fax me in their monthly reporting statement, and then they'd call me or video call me so I could talk to them. We'd discuss everything, how things are going on the boat, this, that, the other thing. What are your plans when you're done with fishing? Are you're not spending all your money out there being dumb in a port or this or that. And when they get to port, they'd have to check in with me again. And they're like, okay, we're unloading the boat. I got to go. I'm like, all right, get out there, behave
Shoot,
yourself.
I'll take that. At least you know they're on a boat. You know they're not getting in trouble.
Yeah,
I mean, how much trouble can you get into on a boat?
They can still be getting high and drunk on the boat.
yeah, they can. They do. There's several
Okay.
times they'd check in at like Dutch Harbor. They'd go to Unalaska at Dutch Harbor and they'd call me, and there's a probation parole office there that's not manned. It's it's really funny. It's not manned. You would have to fly out there to check in on your probationers. So the local police officer is somebody that was a police officer in Great Falls, Montana, and I knew him. His name was Matt Jones, and I'd call Matt and say, "Hey, I got somebody coming in off the boat. They're gonna load up the boat, or they're dumping off. Can you UA him?" And Matt would UA him there, and he'd make sure that everything got faxed over to me and stuff. So the local law enforcement officers, all the POs, or all the police officers, all the state troopers and stuff work with you. So it made the job.
Yeah, that's crazy. I couldn't imagine calling a cop to ask them to do a UA. I couldn't imagine it. They'd be like, "What? That ain't got nothing to do with us." Wow.
Yeah, they're just like, yeah, we can do that for you, no problem. There was a lot that the brotherhood of law enforcement in Alaska, I think, is stronger than anywhere I've ever seen. I mean, you go corrections officers, probation officers, the troopers, the local PD, and then the troopers have a division that is called court security officers, CSOs. So they kind of act like deputy sheriffs in other states. But they're responsible for moving prisoners all over the state. They're responsible for all the court security and all that. They're a regular trooper. They just wear a different uniform. And even those guys, I mean, everybody is one big family, and it's really, really tight knit. There's only, in the entire state of Alaska, there's 378 Alaska state troopers. There's I can't remember how many POs. I mean, there's probably 400 POs in the state, but the local law enforcement, just Anchorage itself, had 470 police officers, and they were short manned all the time. But yeah, everybody works together because you have to, because there's there's no other way around it.
Wow, Brittany, that's a different kind of beast right there.
Sounds kind of fun, low key. What's the salary like for POs over there?
Your starting wages in Alaska is, I believe it was $19.45 an hour. When I retired, I was up to $42.35 plus the benefits. I mean, because I'd been there so long, I worked 4 10-hour shifts too. So I worked Monday through Thursday. I had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off.
Mhm.
Then you had your leave. I made 12 every 2 weeks. I made 12.84 hours of leave every 2 weeks. So you get a lot of time off too. I mean, but the wages are good, and it's the best health insurance that you could ever ask for. They cover everything.
That means a lot.
Now, not a lot of people can say that.
No. I mean, I work at a local hardware store now. I run equipment at the hardware store, and my insurance in Alaska for the premium thing cost me $45 a month. That was it. And the state picks up the rest of it. Just at the local store here through the corporation that I work for, I'm paying $184 a month for my insurance, and it's not very good. So I'm like, I don't want.
But you wouldn't go back to Alaska. You wouldn't move back there.
No. I mean, I'd go back and visit. I still have my daughter lives there. I'm a daughter, all my buddies and my friends and stuff live there. But I'd go back and visit, go fishing and go hunting. But yeah, no, I'm done living there. Too isolated. I mean, it's like living on an island, because there's one highway that goes out of Alaska. It goes from Alaska. You have to go all the way to the northwest tip of Alaska, and then come back down through the Yukon in Canada. And then, I mean, it's from my house here, it's 3,800 miles just to get to Anchorage. So it's a long, long drive, and there's nothing in northern Canada. There's nothing there.
Wow. So how was dealing with the winter and probation in Alaska? Because I mean, I lived in northern PA, and we got snow, especially off Lake Erie, and
Hey,
we get some snow, but I can't. I know in Alaska it's just ridiculous.
my dad's from Matorsville,
Oh, okay,
Williamsport, Matorsville. That's where my dad was
okay.
born. I have a ton of family there still. Um, Dealing with it because, well, Anchorage, you get, I think the average snowfall in Anchorage alone in that big city is 98 inches a year.
Ooh,
You get a ton of snow, and when it starts snowing, it usually starts snowing like mid-October, and the snow doesn't go away until June. Like the snow till
June.
May, June. Yeah, just about the time where it's completely light out. When you get to the summer equinox in June, the sun will go down at about 11:30. It goes right below the horizon, then it's right back up at 3 o'clock in the morning. In the wintertime, the sun comes up at about 10 in the morning, and then goes right back down at like 3:15 in the afternoon. The only way I can describe that is like, put a little tiny light bulb in one lamp in the corner of your living room and turn that on, turn the rest of the lights off, and that's the kind of light you have all winter long. It's like the street lights are on constantly. Dealing with the snow and everything, it's not so bad because people don't go anywhere in the wintertime unless they're flying out to Hawaii or Mexico or something. So it wasn't so bad. The wintertime is actually easier to deal with the probationers, except where they get bored, and that's when they start drinking and doing stupid crap at home because it's dark all the time. It's miserable and it's
Lot,
depressing.
lot of domestic violence, I would assume.
Yes, Alaska is number one for domestic violence and number one for suicides in the country. Yeah.
Damn.
And I think they're still number one. They're either number one or number two for alcohol abuse.
Hmm.
I know I'll be drunk if I was there. That sounds terrible.
I'm not gonna say we didn't. You didn't
You
get
said
hurt for it.
you said earlier that part of your duty was doing patrol. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so we because it's a community based. I mean, we would go do bar checks. You'd walk through bars, checking for probationers. You'd walk through the parks. You'd patrol the downtown. It was the community presence that they really wanted. They wanted us out there to be seen, to know that we were doing our jobs in the community, that we weren't just letting all these people loose in the community and just not worrying about them for a month. That we were out there at night. We were out there during the day. We'd go to businesses and check on them, say, "Hey, you guys have any problems?" Walk through the bus station there. Buses are a fairly big deal, community transit there. So we'd walk through the bus stations, and the managers would come out and say hi to us and make sure, and they'd say, "Hey, so and so is over here. They're laying in the corner drunk, or so and so is causing a problem." And we'd go talk to them, chat them up, and try to help them out. And if they needed help, we'd get them the help that they needed. I mean, we were very community based that way. So yeah, we did a lot of patrols, and I did a lot of patrols at night. We'd have hotels call us and say, "Hey, I think one of your probationers here, they're partying in a room, or something's going on." So we'd call the PD and say, "Hey, you guys want to meet us over there, just in case there's none of our guys there, at least you're there as backup." And a lot of times PD would say, "Hey, we have a suspicion, suspect, or we think it's one of your probation officers, one of your probationers or parolees in so and so's place or whatever. Can you meet us there and back us up?" And we do a lot of that.
Obviously, I know you said you guys went through the full police academy, which is one of the things we were talking about on the Two Hats podcast Instagram page, about whether probation officers should be full sworn law enforcement, or kind of have us be our own separate thing. So you guys are fully blown law enforcement. Do you guys have like full police powers?
Yes. Yeah. You have the full powers. of any other police officer in the state. But the difference is that your jurisdiction is only in your district. So wherever you're at, like I couldn't go to Juneau and be in Juneau and see something happen and arrest somebody in Juneau. My jurisdiction, my scope of my authority was only in the Anchorage district. So I couldn't do that. But yeah. And our academy is not exactly the same as it is for, a road patrol or, something like that. It's shortened compared to theirs, but it's lengthened in one aspect. So we have to learn more about the courts and how that system plays out and how to do all that stuff and how to actually be in community supervision, whereas they're learning how to enforce the law and not get, and drive and not get killed and stuff. So there was a slight separation there.
So did you guys have like the power to arrest non-probationers?
Yes.
For crimes committed in your presence?
Yep. Yes, we did.
Have you ever done that?
Have I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we were patrolling. There's one of my favorite coffee shops in Anchorage is downtown. It's called Kaladi Brothers. The place has got the best coffee in the world. It's awesome. My partner Carl and I were driving downtown, and two guys were standing in the middle of the street fighting, like literally in the middle of this 4-lane road, and they're just going to blows. And so we just stopped, flipped the lights on, stopped, jumped out, tackled them, and arrested them for drunken, disorderly, and assault. And I just called PD, APD, and said, "Hey, can you guys come pick these guys up? We're actually going to do something else." And they're like, "Oh yeah." Had all the paperwork done for them. They transported them up to jail for us. So, yeah.
Wow.
Wait, so did that count? Did that count as your arrest, and like you had to go to court and do the whole like conviction step, or is it more like you just detained them?
No, that was my arrest, and I had to deal with all the court paperwork. I had to deal with going to court. I had to do everything. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, because where I'm at, we're able to, we can detain people for crimes committed in our presence,
Mm-hmm.
but then we have to call local PD or the sheriff's office, and then once they get there, relinquish, custody of them. So
Yeah.
that's actually interesting that you guys actually have the ability to actually file charges and do all that.
Yep, we can do it. We could do the whole kit and caboodle, and 99% of the time they didn't. And it would be in that situation like you just stated, where the probation officers, because a lot of them were not, in Alaska, you have the option to be armed or not be armed. So you don't have to be armed as a probation officer in Alaska. The people that are prior law enforcement like me, you go in and you qualify, you take your instruction, you qualify, you're done. Those are the people that didn't have firearms or that didn't want to do it, that were more on that leaning towards social services type folks. They were the ones that would detain them. They'd have tasers and stuff, but they'd detain them and then call APD. APD would come and take care of it and do their charges and everything. But for me and my partners, all on my unit, all of us were prior law enforcement. We were all, except for one, sorry, Vang wasn't, but we were all armed. We were in our unit, we were required to be armed. We had to be armed because of the nature of the people we dealt with.
So even the non-armed ones, they still went through the post academy, but they just still chose not to. So they didn't have to do firearms as part of the post academy.
No, if they chose not to be armed, we offered, because I'm a firearms instructor too. So I mean, I firearms, taser, CQB, one-on-one control tactics, master armor. I was kind of the hat. I wore all of the hats on my unit, so everybody bring me their guns to fix and all that kind of stuff. We did offer classes so that they could go qualify if they wanted to. Like if they got into it and went, I had a couple bad experiences. I think maybe I better have my firearm with me, because in my mind, you're wearing a badge and you're wearing the body and you're driving a marked vehicle. They don't separate that out. They see the badge and they see the handcuffs. They don't separate out the fact that, or they'll see the taser there, and separate out that. So you want to have those tools available to you at any time. But so we would offer the classes if they wanted to take it, and it was only, the firearms instruction post academy was only a week. Take them out, do 1 week worth of basically classroom time, teach them how to shoot, and then we do another week in the range. And by the end of the range time, they should technically be able to qualify. There was a lot of them that couldn't. They tried over and over and over, and and some people just aren't very good with a firearm. And the people like, we can keep trying, but I think you may want to find a different job.
That's terrible.
It is horrible to say, but some people need to realize that if they might want to find a different career. I mean, if you're at that point where you're having a hard time with enforcing the laws and enforcing their conditions and stuff, maybe you want to go do social services or something that's a little bit more geared toward your mindset or your physical abilities.
Yeah, the job is not for everybody.
No, it's not. I mean, after the length of time I put in law enforcement altogether and my different sections of my career, everybody's asking me here when I moved home, why don't you go to be a deputy sheriff, or why don't you put in to be the town marshal, or why don't you go back to probation parole? And I've had enough. I'm just done. I just want to be the normal everyday guy and not worry about it, but I still carry my gun.
Wears you down. Wears you down over time.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Wait, you say you still carry your gun and your badge?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because I have a retired ID and badge. So in most states, if you have your retired credentials, you don't have to have a concealed weapons permit. And
that's the
Montana
HR 218 Law Enforcement LEOSHA Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act. It's a national law that allows retired and current law enforcement within certain criteria. Something you guys, kids, make sure you look it up, Google it, because there are certain criteria you have to meet, and you can actually carry your firearm anywhere in the country, even in states where you're not allowed to carry firearms, like New Jersey and New York. The catch, though, is that it doesn't cover you in terms of like ammunition capacity or ammunition types, depending on what state you go to. So like, California, New York, New Jersey, I think they're like limited to like 10 rounds. So you can't say, oh, well, I'm a cop from, Georgia. I'm just going to go up there with my Glock 17 with my 17 rounds in the chamber in the magazine. No, that's technically illegal. You're good. You're covered on the gun part, but you're not covered underneath the ammo part. So make sure you read the laws.
And Montana is a constitutional carry state too. So you don't need to have a concealed weapons permit in the state, which is a little scary because there's a lot of people that should not.
I would agree with that. There's some people that should not own guns and carry them because they don't do it smartly, safely, and they don't have good judgment.
Yeah, and that was scary in Alaska too, because Alaska doesn't have a concealed weapons permit. So, and considering that most people, I mean, I think there's almost more guns per capita in the state of Alaska than anywhere else, and most people were armed there in one capacity.
That's what I was going to ask you. It's like, how can you have officers that choose not to be armed in a state like Alaska where guns are so prevalent? They're everywhere and everybody has one.
I don't
or
know.
Two, or three.
One of the weird things that just blew me away when I was actually going through the probation parole portion of the academy, people were opting not to go to the firearms instruction. I'm like, how can you opt not to go? Isn't this required? And they told me, oh no, it's not required. You don't have to carry as a probation parole officer in Alaska. And I'm like, why wouldn't you want to? I mean, it's just, if anything, sometimes it can be your lifesaver. Sometimes it's just a deterrent. Just having it there, people back up and okay, I'm done. But I don't know. I am just as confused as you are on that. Why they would say you don't have to carry. You have that option to or not to. It blew me.
Like, I was a juvenile probation officer in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. And my department, you actually had the choice whether you wanted to carry or not. And the firearms portion is just like how you described. You get a week of the classroom stuff, going over use of force, the actual, how to use the gun, break it down, clean it, all that good stuff. Then you got a whole week on the range where you actually get your marksmanship. You got to qualify and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say, out of my department, like I said, we had about 30 officers. I think only like between 5 and 7 actually carried. And I just could never understand it, what I mean? Especially because Westmoreland County was so rural. And I understand a lot of people are like, oh, well, you're working with juveniles and, it's not as, as risky. I would disagree. I said
I would,
juveniles are more dangerous than adults because they don't think anything through.
right. They're very impulsive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
They don't think to the action. They don't think about that. Then again, most of the probation adults don't either, but I mean, they're definitely very unpredictable in my book. And so anybody that's a juvenile probation and parole officer, I go, my hat's off to you guys because that is a hard job.
it is. Actually, this current state I'm in now, their juvenile officers don't even carry at all, which I just think is crazy. It's crazy, but we're not gonna get into that right now. Um, Now, when you were telling the story about the arresting the guys in the fight, you said you turned the lights on. You guys have emergency lights?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
They're
I'm jealous.
It's a slick top. So I mean they're in the dash up in the windshield in the back window. They're not, they're not marked as a normal police officer's car would be. But yeah, we flip the lights on. We have lights, sirens, the whole kit and caboodle.
Wow. So what are your policy in terms of using lights and sirens? Like what would you actually use them for? Just being a regular probation and parole officer.
Any the rules govern probation and parole as with any other police officer. The those are the rules. I mean, it's if you're going code 3 somewhere, if you're making a quick stop, if you're just 99% of the time nobody pulled anybody over for speeding or anything, but if you're pulling over to help somebody, vehicle in distress, public assistance, citizen assist, things like that. If you're going to an emergency, if you're the closest law enforcement officer, I mean, obviously you're going to turn your lights and sirens on, you're going to go. But when you do something like that, you fall under every other rule and regulation of every police officer in the state as far as your responsibility driving while you're going to a call on code. So if you have your lights and sirens on, you better be paying attention because if you hit somebody or something, it's on you. And like with a police officer, most regular police officers, if they get into an accident and they are speeding because they're trying to get to a call, that's usually their fault. They don't look at it as the citizen's fault. And there's only been, I think, one person in my time up there got in an accident when they were going to a call, and that was because they ran the red light. They didn't slow. They didn't give caution at the red light. I mean, it's just the same way as everybody else. You see a police officer going through a red light in their lights and sirens, they automatically hit the brakes and you start to pull in, you check, make sure everybody's stopping, getting out of your way, and then you go. This person didn't. They just blew right through it and T-boned somebody. It's the only time I've ever seen them, somebody, they got in a little bit of trouble for that one. And we had to pay out for the medical expenses and the car and all that. So.
But you guys don't respond to calls for service, though.
No. Dispatch, when we'd go on duty and we'd go, we'd call on, dispatch knew because our badge numbers are different. So my badge was P224. And I'd tell them, dispatch P224 10-8 and just tell them where I'm going, doing, we'd always call out wherever we're at, address and all that, just like any other law enforcement officer. But when a call for service came in, they knew that even if I was, right there, they knew that we were probation and parole and we were probably dealing with somebody else and not to call us onto that. There were times where we were 10-8 and just out patrolling. I'm the closest unit and dispatch was like, hey, everybody else is busy. Can you go to this one? Boom, and you go. But they made it a general rule that they didn't call us for calls of service now.
So in what circumstances would you guys respond code 3 to? Just another like officer need assistance call?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we were close law enforcement and an officer needed assistance, we'd go code 3, or we'd just tell them, hey, P224 code 3 to scene, and off we'd go.
Now, Brett, you had to do that too, right? You guys had to communicate with dispatch when you guys went to houses and stuff like that.
Yeah, we have radios in the car. So our cars, probably weren't half as equipped as you guys' cars were.
You guys
What
don't
you guys
have
had was just the radio.
Yeah, just the radio.
you know,
I don't know if you're familiar with Shane, but the department that I worked for, we didn't have weapons. We didn't have OC. We didn't have anything. No vests, anything. We just had us and a radio in the car.
And you were expected to go to people's houses, but they don't go into
Yeah.
houses. They just go to the front door.
Really?
Yeah. Chris always makes fun of me for that, but yeah.
Oh man, see,
So it was very much so on the social work side of things.
Alaska treats the home as an extension of a jail cell.
Wow.
So if you had search conditions in your probation and parole conditions, that your home was like any other place. So you walk in, tell them, hey, have a seat, handcuff them, sit them down in a chair after you cleared it, and then you'd search the home.
Oh God, no. Only like the specialty caseload officers were allowed to go in and look, like the sex offender officers or the DV officers, and they could go in and search, but they didn't have handcuffs or weapons still.
Oh wow, I wouldn't somebody's house
Yeah.
without.
That's crazy. That's not safe. It's only a matter of time that somebody gets hurt.
Don't say that. Why would you say
I
that?
mean, it's just because it is. It's just a fact. It's like how do you require somebody to go do that stuff, but you don't give them the equipment they need to do it safely?
Yeah, and I
You know
don't
what?
think
You have to take that up with the director. You want me to call him? I'm
No,
just playing.
go ahead, Brittany. Yeah, we got to do that. We got to get them on for an interview and ask them why they make bad decisions.
We're not going to do that.
you want to keep your job, right?
Well, actually, I stopped working there in July last year. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's good and bad, I suppose, probably. Yeah.
I mean, they never had any problems. There was never any issue with an officer getting hurt or something, searching somebody's house and going through their stuff.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Maybe what they do there is fine. There
And my
hasn't
question-
been an issue.
My
So
question then is, what happens when you find something they don't want you to find, and then now there's a conflict?
Yeah, true. But they just
Then
have to call local law enforcement.
Yeah, one-on-one control tactics, regular law enforcement come and see you. So what do you do now, though?
Oh, me? Oh, well, aside from this awesome podcast that you're being featured on today, I'm a digital creator, so I make YouTube videos. I
Oh, there you
create content, for different businesses online. So my social media presence is what I do. I'm just being me. And I get paid to do that. And it's amazing. And I consult people one-on-one too.
How long were you in probation parole then?
I did that for almost 5 years.
Okay.
How
So
you gonna start interviewing me? Hold on, Shane. This is not turning out the way it was supposed to.
I don't ask Chris the same. I'm going to ask him the same question. So,
Go ahead, ask him. He loves questions.
Transition back to civilian life.
No.
For me, it was a brief.
You're asking me or Brittany?
Both of you. Did you? I mean, you obviously going back and forth on duty. That's kind of normal. You have to do a certain amount of transition. But for Brittany, did you find it difficult to transition back, or was it just like this load taken off your shoulders?
Really, it was a relief a little bit because I was kind of over it. But I mean, that job was more so like a social worker. Like it would be different for you or Chris, I think, because it was more law enforcement oriented for you two. But for me, it's just like they would come to my office and be like, "Hey, what's up?" It's just more cordial and less law. I'm just being real, okay?
There you go.
Okay, so Chris, your turn. You answer the question.
I just transitioned from being a juvenile officer in Western PA to where I am at now, where I'm an adult probation and parole officer, and I specialize in drug court. So, I mean, there wasn't really a gap. I literally left one job, started the other job. I mean, I had to go through 2 academies, but I mean, it is what it is. I think I actually prefer working with adults now that I think about it than when I was working with juveniles. Um, we can just do more. And I think there's more impact on actual community safety working with the adults than working with juveniles. So I don't know if that
Right.
answers your question or not.
I would think
No, it
that.
doesn't.
Well, it's tough for him, Brady, because he's still active duty. So there's a
True.
me too, we went, yeah, we're done.
Yeah, I'm still in these streets putting up a good fight.
And
Which
that's
Chris and I were just talking about a little bit about how his caseload is going right now. Chris, want to elaborate and tell the family how your caseload's doing?
I mean, it is what it is. It's drug court. I think we talked about it when we did the episode with the other drug court officer up in PA. Can't remember Matt. I think his name was Matt. It's just with drug court, it's either they're in compliance or they abscond. There really isn't anything in between. So I'm just kind of dealing with that right now. Yeah, that's really it. I mean,
For a lot of absconders.
a lot of
do you,
absconders. I mean,
that's what I'm gonna
what it
ask
is.
you. Do you find it with drug court? Is there a lot more absconding than there is with like your other caseload?
Yes, because they know that, with drug court, if they're constantly, there's a lot of requirements on them. There's a lot of things they have to do. They have to, take treatment. They got to meet with their case manager. They have to work with the team. They got to come to court every 2 weeks. They have to report for color call drug screens, which they have to call every day. And if their color is called, they got to drop whatever they're doing that day and come. I mean, there are a lot of requirements. And I mean, they're all there for a purpose, and they're all there to build on each other to get the offender where they need to be a responsible person in society and get them off drugs. But a lot of them, they don't want to stop. And addiction is hard. I've been working with addiction even back when I was a juvenile officer, and addiction is really hard. It is a disease. I totally believe that. And it's hard for people to get off, and it's hard for people to make that change. Now, when they decide to make that change, drug court is the best place to make that change because you have so much support. You have a whole team of people wrapped around you. You have all these different resources available to you, from housing to health and, family. And there's so much stuff that's available to you that if you decide that your goal is to get clean and you really want it for yourself and you get in this program, like I said, you have all the support that you'll ever need. But if you're just doing it because you want to, you don't want to go to jail, you don't want to go to prison, and you're just taking it as a option to avoid those kind of incarceration, and you don't really mean it, it's going to be too hard for you.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. But I think there's a disparity there between like what you're talking about with drug court. They get all these resources to be able to help them through and this, all their addiction, and be able to help prop them up and push them forward and get away from that and be productive again. With sex offenders, it's similar. There's all these resources that they have available to them. They have, they have their treatment. They have all these people insulating them and helping them and making sure that they're not acting on the things that are going through their mind and all that. I mean, and to move them forward so that they can control those things and be able to control their life. But then you look at the probationers and parolees and stuff that are there for, they have violent tempers, or they have, there's very few resources. I mean, violent guys, yeah, they have anger management, and there's very few resources for those other people, those other probation parolees to use to insulate themselves to be able to get through the whole process, because it's not easy. I mean, I said it's easy. You have to come to my office once a month unless you get in trouble. But yet they have all these other restrictions that make it hard on them, and there's no resources for them. So I think that some of that needs to be turned toward the average guy that, yeah, you got caught stealing a bunch of crap, and you got put on probation. You're a nonviolent offender. You need some resources to help you out to get through, maybe, help you get through school, to help find a place to live, to find a new job, things like that. They don't have those resources readily available to them. They have to go search it out themselves. I think that makes it really hard for them.
Yeah, that's something that Brittany talks about all the time, is that the lack of resources. And I know she always talks about, lack of transportation to even get around,
Right.
to place, get to their treatment or get to classes and things like that. I understand, because when I started out, I was a line officer, so I got, regular probation parole cases, and yeah, I might. Well, we have places. I'm fortunate enough to work in a city where there are resources, for people, but it's still a lot of, you kind of got to do it yourself. I'll refer you, I'll set the appointment, but I'm not going to pick you up and take you.
Right. You got to
You
figure
know
out
what
how
I
to.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not assigning you a case manager that's going to call and check up on you. You know what I mean? You're not going to come back and see the judge every so often to see, how you're doing.
Right.
Only time you see the judge is after I arrest you for violating.
It's like they're self-paced, and some of them just can't do it.
Yes, that is true. They can't. It is.
What else you want to know, Chris? I keep asking you guys questions. What else you want to?
I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I don't mind at all. So how did you decide that it was time for you to retire and be done?
Um, I got into an incident. And I won't go into all the gore details, but it was a pretty violent incident, and it bothered me to the point that I said, I don't think that I am capable of doing this job anymore. I got to the point where it's been so long. 26 years in law enforcement, and I was just like, I think this is better left for somebody else to have to deal with, and I didn't want to have that weight and that pressure anymore. Um, although I still volunteer for like Habitat for Humanity. I volunteer for there's a program called STAR, Stand Against Rape, and I volunteer for that. I volunteer for the Special Olympics and stuff. I do all this community things. Even the the civic group that does all the flowers in town. I volunteered with them here a couple of weeks ago and helped them redo all their whiskey barrels for planting their flowers in town and stuff. So I still do that. It's just that law enforcement aspect of it. It just kind of clicked in my head. I think I'm done. And when you get to that point where you say, I'm not sure I can do this job, that I'm capable of it. I was physically capable, but mentally, I think I was just worn out, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I said, after that one incident, I just said, I'm just done. I don't think I can do this. I don't want to see this kind of thing anymore.
Without going into details about that incident, do you feel like your department had your back regarding whatever happened? Because I know that's a fear a lot of POs have, is that we're afraid that the department doesn't have our backs, like, police departments have their officers' backs.
I think it's a yes and a no, honestly. It was a yes in the fact that my supervisor and my chief sought me out, and pulled me aside and said, here's a couple of phone numbers, here's some resources, this is what we want you to do if you need them. But as far as anything that was required to do it, no. But they did have my back as far as, saying, hey, if you need some help, if you need to talk to somebody, if you need this, you need that, just let us know and we'll be able to take care of it. But as far as guiding me there, yeah, they did that. But pushing me to it and saying, hey, you have to go do this because we're more concerned about your mental ability, your mental state, or how this is affecting you and your job or your family life. No, they honestly just didn't care. It was like, here you go. You'll be back on Monday, right?
Wow.
That kind of. So yeah, I don't think that's one of the things I think is missing from any probation parole department, any corrections department, period. Whether you're a corrections officer, if you're probation or parole, I think that's lacking, is the not just, it's self-care, but the department's concern about your health and well-being, to be able to say, okay, if you have a major incident, you're required to go see the psychologist, and to open it up. Now, we did start after that. I have a couple of friends of mine that are doctors, and then I worked with uh, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, and everything on the internet crimes, ICAC, internet crimes against children. Worked on that task force with them. We had our psychologists and everything that were available through grants to help other officers and other departments. It wasn't just any ICAC member, it was everybody across the board. So after the incident that I dealt with, I went to them and said, I need some help. This is bugging me. I don't know what to do. This is causing me not to sleep, this, that, the other thing. One of the U.S. Marshals that I worked with on the task force said, hey, you know what? I think maybe we need to make this available to all of you guys too. And maybe we should try to push. The policy says that if something happens like this, or something that it is mandatory that you go speak to somebody, because this is going to happen to people. And your mental state is going to change. And I think that they don't do anywhere near enough of that. But after that incident, we did start that. So now that was one of my little, pinning feathers when I left, was that is now available to everybody in the Department of Corrections. Doesn't matter whether they're probation and parole or corrections officer or the tech that's sitting there doing all the UAs. If you have an issue, you go talk to the guy that's with ICAC. They bring the psychologist in, they bring the team members in, and they help you through it. And that was started after my incident. But after my incident, I went to a training class. Gosh, I can't remember the gentleman's name. He was a retired highway patrol, California Highway Patrol. He's called the Guardian of the Golden Gate. He's the one that talked everybody down from jumping off the bridge and everything. And I can't remember his name now. It was after I went to his classes and actually got to sit through his stuff for that week that I was like, he did the same thing. He's like, this has bothered me so much that I need some help. So he finally got grants and everything and got it all set up. So yeah, that's more available now, but I'm not sure that's like that in every department. I think everybody should have that set up somehow.
Chris, do you have something like that?
No, I'm pretty good. You got any other questions?
No, I said, do you have something like that in your department?
I remember reading through the policy that they have a procedure. I just don't know exactly, and I think they have I think it's more peer support. I don't think they have a doctor or psychologist on staff available to assist with that.
That's part, though, is that there's a peer support network there. So when we started that, you actually have to sign up for it. You have to sign up and say, hey, if these people, if anybody else in my office is having a problem, then they have somebody to come talk to. And it doesn't go through the command staff. It goes through the officers themselves. So there's less likelihood of feeling ostracized, or that there's, they're going to kick you out or take your badge because something's wrong with you or anything like that. It's all a peer driven thing. So we intentionally left them out of it so that wouldn't happen. And so that's like the very beginning stages of that, Chris, is where you have that policy, but 99% of them don't know how to do it. So that's something you could probably work on too, is, hey, pull that policy, read through it, and then get a list of other officers that are willing to, lend a shoulder if needed, or help guide you toward the resources, because a lot of the officers are the ones that have the resources because of the units that they work on. Now, I was fortunate to have those resources because of the two things that I did, ICAC and then the sex offender part of it was that those doctors were available to us anytime. And all they said was, yeah, if you guys need help, let us know. And they're all psychologists and psychotherapists. So they're trained to deal with, issues in the brain. And then with ICAC, it was a different set of people that had different resources. So I was able to guide everybody toward that. And when we left the command staff out of it, they got a little, forgive the language, a little butthurt about it because we left them out, but we left them out because we didn't want them looking down on anybody or having that officer go, well, if I do this, the command's they're going to think I'm nuts. Well, no, everybody in the office knows that you're going to need help at one time or another. You're going to need somebody to talk to. So if you make it available, you make yourself available, and then do a list like that where everybody has that list of people that they can contact if something's happening. And some of it, like the doctors that we worked with, they said, we don't care if it's professional or personal. If you're having personal problems at home, come talk to me. We'll help you out. We'll help you get through it, that kind of stuff. So you'll find that they're very open to that. They're very, they're very able to give up their time. They're just more than willing. It's great.
Wow. Like, I know we have a employee assistance program, but it's kind of like one of those general things that all like big jobs kind of have.
Mm-hmm.
We had that too.
They like pay an outside company to provide that kind of service. So I'm not exactly sure how great it is or how personal it can get, but I guess it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's a good start. It's a good start no matter what.
But hey, Shane, man, we appreciate you definitely sitting down and interviewing with us today. We definitely do.
Problem, man. Anytime.
A big thing what we try to do is interview officers from all over the country so that people, our listeners, our family members can really see that, probation and parole is different every single where you go, everywhere you go, and I think that's a big attraction that we do have. And I definitely think Alaska, people are really gonna enjoy hearing about how things are done in Alaska.
It's a little different, so yeah, I think they'll probably go, "Wow, you guys are nuts."
You got any questions, Brittany?
No, I think I'm tapped out.
All right.
I enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, you guys are welcome. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me. And it's not often you get asked about your career, so.
And we appreciate
really,
you.
I would think everybody would ask you. You seem to have a wealth of knowledge about this law enforcement stuff.
Yeah, that's because I've been doing it for too long.
All right, Shane. Thank you for being a family member here in the Two Hats podcast. We appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
we definitely appreciate all your support.
Thanks for having me on. You guys enjoy your day off.
Thank you so much, Shane. That was an awesome interview. Hearing about the way probation and parole is done in Alaska, it really blew me. I didn't think that it was going to be like that. I've never been to Alaska. Have you ever been to Alaska, Chris?
I've never been to Alaska, and I'll be honest with you, I probably have no interest in going to Alaska.
Well, I want to go to Alaska and see how this is dark all day. I didn't even know that. I feel like I didn't know that. Like it's dark there for many, many hours. But anywho, if you guys want to go ahead and follow Two Heads Podcast on Instagram, please do so. Also, we're available on Spotify, on YouTube, Google Podcasts, and as Chris says, we're available on Apple too. I don't know if that's true, but we're still trying to figure it out.
That is true. Someone did tell me.
Oh my God.
We are on there. We are on there.
How did I not know this? This is crazy. And if you would like to be featured here on the podcast, please send an email to twohatspodcast@gmail.com. We will respond to you within 24 hours.
Or just DM us on the Instagram page.
I mean, it needs to be a little bit more formal than that, but we're family over here, so that's fine. Y'all can DM us on Instagram at Two Heads Podcast.
I'm simple.
We know. Not just okay, that's it for today's episode. We will holler at y'all in the next one.
All right, bye.